This is Pet Life Radio. Let's talk pets.
Hi, y'all, and welcome to Horsing Around. Saddle up and get ready to have a darn tootin', galloping good time as we trot out the show that's your ultimate horse source, of course. Find out how to use good old horse sense when it comes to breeding, feeding, training, and explaining. From practical tips on caring for your horse's health to advice on how to buy horse supplies, including bridles, halters, saddles, and more. So get ready to start horsing around with your host, horse expert and award-winning rider, Audrey Pavia. Howdy, Audrey.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Horsing Around on PetLifeRadio.com. Thanks for joining us. This week, we're going to talk about different equine personalities and how to handle them. Our guest is trainer and clinician Charles Wilhelm of Castro Valley, California. Charles is the author of Build Your Dream Horse, a book that helps horse owners of all experience levels provide foundation training for their horses. In his book, Charles talks about 7 different personality types that all horses fall into: compliant, bully, indifferent, timid, nervous Nelly, lethargic, and way too smart. Over the next half hour, we're going to talk to Charles about these different types of horses and how to handle them. We'll be right back after these messages.
Why the long face? I reckon Horsing Around will be back in the saddle right after we round up a few words from our sponsors.
It's DesignerPetSweaters.com. Hand-knitted designer sweaters for your precious pup or cool cat. Beautiful couture patterns for your pets, including custom-knitted formal wear, casual wear, yachting, and even sports-themed. Many designer pet sweaters include feathered tammy hats, top hats, and a lot of sparkle. Each sweater includes leg loops, front paw sleeves, and leash opening. Visit DesignerPetSweaters.com to order your 4-legged fashions today. Your pets will stay warm for the winter and be runway ready. Large or small, we fit them all. DesignerPetSweaters.com.
Let's Talk Pets on PetLifeRadio.com.
We know you're chomping at the bit to hear more horsing around. Well, we're back on the trail. So park yourself over yonder and set a spell. You ain't heard nothing yet.
Welcome back to Horsing Around. I'm your host, Audrey Pavia, and today we are talking to trainer and clinician Charles Wilhelm, author of Building Your Dream Horse. Charles, welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Sure. Now, Building Your Dream Horse is a wonderful book that provides step-by-step details on how to provide your horse with foundation training, which is something every horse needs in order to be a good companion. But what really struck me about the book is the different personality types that you describe, and I recognized every horse I've ever had in those personality types. And what I want to do today is talk about each of these personalities and get a sense of how to handle them. Sure. So first off, you had mentioned something to me earlier about how you came up with these personality types. Did you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, if I could just take a moment and kind of fill you in a little bit how I came up with this. You know, after working with problem horses for a few years, I started seeing a string of different types of horses come into play, you know, coming into categories, and you started to recognize them. And so I started putting them in, you know, order. Then the other reason was the most of my clients that I worked with was, you know, returning riders or getting the horse for the first time. And I, by giving them names to their personality, I found that it was much easier for them to relate to the horse and how to train the horse and what needs to be done for that particular personality.
So why don't we first talk about the compliant horse? Now, this seems to be like the easiest horse for just about anybody to deal with.
Well, the compliant horse is probably makes up probably less than 5% of all the horses that it's out there. It's a real willing horse. It's their attitude says, I don't care, whatever you want, it's do it. They usually have a pretty good work ethic. Their temperament is real quiet. They're usually not a high emotional horse. In other words, they're not a high flight instinct on them. And it makes it much easier for a novice to work with a horse like that. And they're a lot more forgiving. The direction from the owner doesn't have to be quite as clear, or if they make a mistake, they're a lot more forgiving about it. Probably, my clientele is about 85% women and returning riders, and that's probably just about the horse they should all have.
Mm-hmm. Now, is it possible to turn any of these other personality types into the compliant horse, or are they born like this?
Well, everyone has their nature, their personality that they're born with. But yes, by training other horses and their personalities, we can make them a lot more compliant. It just takes a little bit more work on our part. It's just that compliant comes natural this way. And also, if I could put in here that your horse could have, one or two of these same, personalities. Mm-hmm. You could have an easygoing horse that's really indifferent. Okay, so this is just a way to put horses in a category that makes it much easier to work with a horse.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now this next one, the bully. I after reading your book, I think I have one of those. He's a young gelding. He's almost 8 years old, and he had a lot of the qualities that you described. Tell me about that particular personality.
Well, the bully, growing up, we've all, or even doing in business, we've all had bullies in our lives, trying to do business or going to school. But it's pretty straightforward. A bully is usually extremely pushy, really wants to get in your space, basically has no respect for humans or horses. I mean, I've seen horses that out with other horses, and they go past the pecking order, if you will. They're just a big bully. They just push people around, push horses around. Mm-hmm. And a bully, it really requires a very confident handler or rider. When you're working with a bully, the communication really has to be black and white. There can be no gray areas. Like the compliant horse, you could, as I mentioned earlier on the compliant horses, if the signal wasn't quite clear or you made a mistake, the compliant horse is really forgiving about that. With a bully, boy, I tell you what, you make a mistake with them or you're not clear on your signals and you're going to pay a price because they always pushing. Now, here's something. Now, you may have to be strong in your actions. You establish the leadership with the bully, but you also have to be careful that you're not over-dominant. You can actually turn them upside down and start making them, timid, believe it or not. It's not so much that you make them timid either.
Right, and you mentioned that in your book, how they can become timid if you are too strong with them, which really struck me as, and I've noticed that in my horse. It really struck me as odd because I could never understand if I got too tough with him, why he would become a fraidy cat from being the kind of horse that was pushing everybody around. Why do you think that happens?
Well, I think that happens is we have to be strong, but we have to correct our horse, and especially with a bully, correction usually comes into play more than with other horses. It's not that we don't correct other horses. But you just can't be picking on them all the time and be domineering with them all the time. You have to choose your battles, okay? So if you kind of overdo it, they start becoming submissive. They start withdrawing inside. And they just, I've seen it in the Army where a bully in the Army growing up in boot camp, the bully really gets pushed around a lot from the acting sergeant or whatever. And because they get hammered on so much, they just start becoming withdrawn. So I think it's just a lack of confidence if it was in humans' terms. And I think it's pretty much the same way, with horses. Just
right.
Have a tendency to be a bully just to override maybe their confidence about things.
Well, that's the sense I got with my horse was that it was, before I read your book, I just kept saying he's all bravado because if he acts like a tough guy, but if you push him, he acts scared. So. Right. That makes a lot of sense. Now, how do you deal with a horse like that with your training?
Well, we get them in here a lot. We probably get more bullies, the nervous Nellies than the bullies. I like to get a lot more compliant horses because it makes my job easier. But you just have to learn to set standards and be consistent in your standards. if you are back and forth on your standards, in other words, one day I'm holding to standards and then the next day, oh, well, it's okay. That can't happen. You have to be consistent. Training any horse, you have to be consistent, but especially in a bully horse, you really have to maintain the consistency. Now, horses' personality can be born with this, just like humans, but sometimes it can also be a learned behavior. I had a stallion in here a couple of years ago. Stallions are usually assertive anyway, but this horse became really assertive, and I'm going to use him as a horse that's a bully, because he got to a point that he was pushing people around so much that you couldn't even put a halter on without him trying to bite you. And it actually took me 45 days of consistent work before I could lead the horse and not feel that this horse was going to eat my lunch. But it had to be day in and day out consistency. So also is when you do make your corrections, make a point, and leave them alone. When you go beyond the correction and you start getting revenge in there, then that's when we're going to kind of browbeat them, and then they start averting and being timid. So that's where we can't overdo it. Make your correction and leave them alone.
Okay. Now, kind of almost on the other side of the spectrum, you have the indifferent horse. What's that horse like?
Well, the indifferent horse, and we've all run across it in people. They could be a willing horse. They could, become a nice performance horse. They could become a nice trail horse. But the indifferent horse is very aloof. They're not a real social animal. A lot of my clients or the people that I work with, they usually want a horse that's a little bit more, warm and fuzzy, and more personable, to have that kind of relationship. And an indifferent horse, it's like, well, the sun's out, the wind's blowing, so what? They're not warm and fuzzy. They're not someone that wants to be in your back pocket. They just soon stand outside the herd. They're actually a horse that's very aloof, could be a great trail horse because they don't need the security of other horses. And the same with a bully. Sometimes a bully can be a great horse out on the trail because they can learn to be, by themselves. But indifferent horse. Now, a horse that's indifferent, it can take you a little bit longer, but you can establish a nice relationship with them. And once you've done that, then they'll be more than willing to pay attention to you and ask and do, whatever you like them to do for you. It just takes more time. Just like people, I don't know if you ever dealt with people that's indifferent, but it really, for me, dealing with people indifferent, it really makes it harder for me to try to have a business relationship or any kind of relationship with them until you break through. And it's almost like they gain a trust, but they'll never be a back pocket pony either.
Now, are there difficulties in training a horse like this?
No, not at all. Actually, it's kind of easy because, they're more willing to do the task. They're just not warm and fuzzy. They don't want to be in your back pocket. They're happy just to stand there and leave you alone. My clients usually don't like that because they want a relationship. They want to be able to go pet on that horse. And an indifferent horse could care less if you pet on them or not. Right.
Okay, well, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, I'm going to ask you about the timid horse. So we'll be right back after these messages.
Why the long face? I reckon Horsing Around will be back in the saddle right after we round up a few words from our sponsors.
Molly, here's your dinner. Zeus, that's not your food.
Don't let that happen to your precious cat. Elevate your cat's eating experience with the Cat Tree Tray. The Cat Tree Tray keeps your cat's food off the floor and conveniently located on the cat tree. It's the perfect way to eat. It's a beautiful wrought iron tray that easily attaches to your cat tree and keeps dogs and other critters out of your cat's dish. A must for multi-pet households. There's a 6-inch tray for large bowls and a 4-inch tray for smaller bowls. Purchase your Cat Tree Tray today. Go right now to cattreetray.com. That's cattreetray.com. CATTREETRAY.com.
Let's Talk Pets on PetLifeRadio.com.
We know you're chomping at the bit to hear more horsing around. Well, we're back on the trail. So park yourself over yonder and set a spell. You ain't heard nothing yet.
Welcome back to Horsing Around. I'm your host, Audrey Pavia, and today we are talking to trainer and clinician Charles Wilhelm, author of Building Your Dream Horse. Okay, we're talking about different personality types in horses. Charles, tell me about the timid horse.
The timid horse is usually a very quiet horse on the outside. And for example, I've had clients go shop for a horse and they go to a breeder or someone and they find the horse to be very quiet, almost docile. They ride it around. They have they seems to be compliant. But anytime the rider asks for anything or put any pressure on it, then the horse starts falling apart. The emotional level rises and starts becoming a horse other than what it is. And it might even blow up because it can't handle the pressure. In other words, once the horse is, long as you're quiet, easygoing, and not asking them anything more in their performance, and of course, a lot of my clients say, "Well, all I want is a trail horse. I don't have to demand a lot of it." Well, when you have a trail horse, you probably should have a pretty broke horse, and it should be able to take a lot of pressure. More probably than an arena horse because there's a lot of circumstances out there. So pressure can mean not only pressure from the owner and asking him to go over a jump or move away from him, but pressure coming up. A deer jumps up, is adding pressure, and it can add a lot more anxiety and just fall apart or blow up. So we have to be careful on those. Now, the horse that's timid, the way that we work with them is that we build up pressure. In other words, like a compliant horse, you can put a lot of pressure on a horse. You can be a little bit more demanding on them to get whatever you need to get done, teaching them to go over a pole or a small cavaletti or go into a trailer. They can take a lot more pressure. But a timid horse, you have to build. For example, I wrote another book called Starting Baby Jazz. The personality was a very compliant personality, but it also had a personality of timid. In other words, it was real easy going. The first day I had it here as a yearling, I got the spray bottle, fly spray, and I fly sprayed it as a yearling, and it didn't care. But as soon as I raised the pressure and started asking more of it, then it started falling apart. So the increments of pressure has to be done in small increments until finally it can handle. Here's another example on that same horse. When I started teaching it round pen, as soon as I added enough pressure to go into a faster gait, it just kind of fell apart. Wanted to stick his head out through the bars and say, "Let me out of here." In other words, it really couldn't deal with the pressure. So all that means is you back down the pressure a little bit and work your way up. And they actually end up being a nice horse. It just takes a little bit longer to train them, and they end up being a nice horse.
So what's the difference between a timid horse and then the nervous Nellie?
Well, the nervous Nellie differs from the timid horse in that it's just nervous about everything. Remember on the timid horse, you went to go look at it, you got on it, you rode it, it was quiet, but you never asked anything of it, and then it fell apart. The nervous Nellie is, he looks at everything, and is just nervous about everything. It's almost like, oh my God, oh my goodness, oh, what's that? I think we've all been on the trail, been around horses like that. The nervous horse is also going to be one that's going to be more inclined to bolt. So, and here again, this is a horse that's more endurable, but it's going to take a lot more time. For example, on a nervous Nellie, what I could get done, let's say in 30 days or say even 2 weeks on a compliant horse, it may take me 3 months, to accept pressure, change its reaction about bolting, except dragging tarps, bottles rustling in the bushes, bicycles. So it just becomes a bigger project.
A horse like that, is there really any way to ever change that personality? Is it always going to be a nervous horse? And depending on the rider, too, could bring that out, I'm guessing.
Oh, sure. I have one of those horses that I bought, and I won't mention the breed, but everyone will say, oh, there you go,
Right. I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
I think he's in your book, right?
Yes, he is.
Yes, uh-huh.
And now, it took me a while to overcome this, but you can change, the way that I feel about this, when I have people come to work with me, I tell them, listen, I don't want to change you, I just want to add to your personality. And that's the way I feel about horses. I can't change them because I think they all come with, the nervous Millie really comes with a high flight instinct, if you will. And I can't change that because that's what God gave them, and they just signed up for a double or triple dose, okay?
Right.
And it just takes longer, and it's usually a horse like that is usually not for, inexperienced person. But it can be. I've had horses here that was bucking and bolting and just snorted at everything. Well, now we're using them as lesson horses for kids. Mm-hmm. But with them, what you have to do, and it's what I learned with my own horse, when you practice riding, we always practice our leg gauge, we practice our seat position, and training a horse. Well, when it comes to the emotions on a horse like that, you always have to work with emotions on maybe in the beginning once a week, and then maybe they'll get every 2 weeks, and then maybe once a month. My horse Tennyson, I can probably go about every 6 or 7 weeks, and we have to go for a tune-up on motional control. Okay. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I can ride him bridleless out on the trail, and I can take him to a horse expo where there could be 30 or 40,000 people, and we, ride through the crowd bridleless, and he's okay with it. But it just has to be maintained. So yes, the question is, he can overcome that, and he can be something different who he is. We just have to maintain that personality and make him more of a solid citizen.
Right, a constant maintenance, it sounds like.
Yeah, constant maintenance, but
yeah. Uh-huh.
It just gets easier now when I work with Tennyson. I spend 20 minutes on his motion and control work, and I go, okay, we're done.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. That lasts for maybe, 6 to 8 weeks. So that's not a bad deal.
And can you, is the emotional control work, is that discussed in your book, in this particular book, Building Your Dream Horse?
Oh, yes, it is stressed in here. Yes, it is in this book, yes.
Let's talk about the lethargic horse. I think I have one of those too.
Yep. Okay. Well,
Lazy.
The lethargic horse is a horse that I don't think a lot of people should buy unless they're pretty confident. And the reason is there are actually two categories of the lethargic horse. There are those who are really cold blood with little life or energy, like your big, not warm bloods, but your big Clydesdale. They're pretty quiet. You know what I mean? They're not real emotional, and usually it takes a lot to move them. The other lethargic one is what I call the sleeper horse. The rider buys this all the time. They're super calm and relaxed, and the sleeper is fine to poke around and appears to be compliant. What you discover is, in the past, they simply never had anything done with it. What that means is it's almost like one of the other horses we talked about, but it just learned to be lethargic. It's learned to be dull. And then once you wake it up, it comes to life again. But the one that's cold-blooded, in fact, both of these, usually when people that buy these kind of horses and they don't maintain the responsiveness, because each of these horses can be real dull or have a tendency to be dull, and they don't want to go forward. And so what happens is they end up getting dull, and then if you end up asking them to move and follow through like we have to do here at the ranch when they come in there, if you ask them to go forward, they could buck, they could rear, They could bolt, throw a tantrum, because basically their attitude is, if you make me move my feet, I'm going to kick your head off. So it takes more of a, experienced rider for a horse like that. It can be a nice horse. I mean, we have Sunrise, an organization that works out on my place. They have a horse that's real lethargic, but more on the compliance side. But it's just, the kids can bounce off of it, bump into it. And because it's more on the cold-blooded side, it's a much safer horse. But on the other hand, if you started asking that horse to start moving forward, it may start developing an attitude that you may not be pleasant to have, like, a buck or a rear up. So these we have to be careful with. You train them is that you always, at a horse like that, you always have to make sure that they're going forward off your leg. I don't care if it's going forward or leg yielding, doing lateral work. You just have to make sure that they're giving to that pressure. And you have to stay on top of them. There's no gray area.
Right. So then we get to the way too smart horse, which that one is interesting to me because it seems like they could respond in a number of different ways to pressure.
Sure, they can. Well, the horse that's way too smart is not always a good horse for an amateur. And I actually bought a horse like that for a client. And the problem is they either always want to anticipate what you're going to do next because they go, I know what we're going to do next, okay? Or they find the holes in your training. I know you handle horses yourself, and you've been around horses, and it's easy for us to find the holes. Oh, yeah, he doesn't do that. Well, we better clean that up. Mm-hmm. But that's what they do, with us as riders and handlers. They find the holes in you. And that horse is usually not a good horse for an amateur because usually an amateur is not in a position, they don't have the confidence or the skills to follow through, so they back down a little bit, and that horse that's way too smart finds that hole and takes advantage of it. In other words, here's some examples. Might go out the gate, okay? Well, he doesn't have any control of my shoulders, so we're going out the gate. So it's becoming more buddy sour because, the owner doesn't know what he's doing, so we're just going right back to the barn. In other words, finds any holes that it can and takes advantage of it.
It seems like those horses all end up at rental stables.
Well, the rental stables, no, it's a little bit different. They know where to go out and to come back. That's it.
Yeah, but I've heard so many stories from people.
Smart. I had one in here. Here's a good example. I had one in here that I was starting. It wasn't a problem horse. It was a horse that was really bred very well, reining cow horse type, and I had a pedigree of the hoo-hoos, the Docolinas and all that stuff. And it was almost born broke. And I teach it to, one time I was working with it and it wouldn't move off my leg. So I went ahead and stopped the horse, started from scratch, had a walk, get that horse to move off my leg. Well, all of a sudden we'd be loping along and I put my leg on a horse that, move it off the rail like a leg yell, and it would just stop and start side passing, okay? Because it goes, oh, this is what you want. Okay. Or like I mentioned earlier, they just find the holes in your training. And this horse could be a very well trained horse. It could be doing flying lead changes. It could be a super trail horse. But if you got an amateur up there that not quite comfortable and understand all the cues, it's going to find all the holes. So I think there's a big difference in the rental ones.
Right.
The rental horses are just flat squirreled.
Right. They just have so many people on them who don't know what they're doing that it's a whole nother category probably. So basically, there's a lot of different personalities of horses out there, and you pretty much have to learn what they are and understand them so that you either know how to deal with the horse that you have or know what you're looking at when you're going to buy a horse. Exactly.
It's kind of like working with people. You learn how to relate to people by understanding their personalities. I have a couple people I do business with, and they're kind of a bully. They're kind of used to having their way and think this is what should be done. It doesn't mean you can't do business with them, but it certainly allows me to put in perspective on who I'm dealing with so we can both come to agreement on something. And the same with a horse. Mm-hmm. Not only do you have a horse that, that we naturally all horses have, flight instinct, herd dynamics, but then you put the personality on top of that. So it's really important is the person just take a few minutes. I got people talking about, well, you got the left brain and the right brain. And that plays a part of the personality, but that's way too complicated for me. Horses wear their emotions and their personalities right on their sleeves, and it has to be dealt with at the time. And once you understand the personality, if I have a nervous Nelly, if I have a bully and I have a tendency to be too aggressive, I can turn that horse, upside down. Okay? Mm-hmm. So what it amounts to, you have to know your personality as well. If you're a weak, timid person yourself, you wouldn't buy a bully horse.
Right.
Okay? Right. Wouldn't be in position.
Or if you have a tendency to be real
aggressive, you wouldn't buy a timid horse. I learned to change my personality all the time, or add to it, work with what I have, because that's what I do. But most people don't have the time or the years to do that. They want to buy a horse and be able to enjoy it. So when they're going out to select a horse, once they know what their personality is, it certainly helps them select one.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Okay. Charles, I want to thank you for being my guest. You've given us a lot to think about, and I'm sure all of our listeners recognize their own horses in this conversation. So I encourage everyone to visit Charles' website at charleswilhelm.com, and there will be a link to the site on the episode info page of the Horsing Around website on PetLifeRadio.com. If you have any questions or comments about Horsing Around, please email me at audrey@PetLifeRadio.com. Until next time, happy trails.
Stop what you're doing and start horsing around every week on Pet Life Radio. Horse expert and award-winning rider Audrey Pavia will be trotting out great tips on feeding, breeding, and more on everything equestrian. So set a spell and say hey to Audrey and get ready for a darn tootin' galloping good time every week on Horsing Around, on demand, only on PetLifeRadio.com.